And I had really hoped to have Timnit here today, but she's obviously busy with a lot of things.
Right.
But the next best thing to having Timnit here is Margaret Mitchell, who is at Google and who was co-author with Timnit of a paper very relevant to all of that, and on large language models, also with Emily Bender. And that paper was just accepted yesterday, and I think this would be a great opportunity to hear a little bit about what's in it. So welcome, Margaret.
Yeah, and hopefully you guys can see everything okay. I'm Margaret Mitchell, otherwise known as Timnit's co-lead at Google, and I'm going to be talking a bit about what we were up to that has gotten us into this mess today. The sort of typical approach to developing machine learning systems uses the sort of four-tiered model where you have training data collected and annotated, then the model is trained, media then can be filtered, there's post-processing steps, and then people see the output. But rather than this sort of clear pipeline that can just be applied by engineers without sort of further consideration, there's human bias coming in from the very start. So this is things like racism and sexism already inherent in the data that we're collecting. And then there's further bias in how we collect that data, where we're sampling the data from, and how we're getting things annotated. And this propagates throughout the rest of development. It's not undone. It further affects model training. And then further in model training, there's further biases and value decisions about what's worth prioritizing and what's worth not prioritizing. So for example, what loss function you use is putting in a value statement of what is worth doing well on and what is not worth doing well on. There are then human biases in how things should be post-processed or generated. And then people see the output and start to act on that output. And to Celeste's point as well, this then becomes a feedback loop. As you see more and more models confirming your pre-existing beliefs, you hone in on those beliefs more and more, and then create more data that then is used to train further models, really creating sort of polarization around different human biases. So we were trying to break this system. We call it bias laundering. I'm really excited to share this slide because it has this awesome graphic I'm very proud of. But the main idea that what we were focusing on is that development is value laden, and there's no such thing as neutrality in development. There's not this idea that like algorithms are neutral or programming is apolitical. Everything packs in human biases and different value judgments. And the difficulty is that the different kinds of decisions that are made will affect different people differently. And so one of the fundamental parts of developing AI ethically is to make sure that from the start, there is a diversity of perspectives and backgrounds at the table. So defining what the problems are, what needs to be looked at, as well as things like how to collect the data. So people who are deeply affected by these technologies are often not considered as part of the development process. And this is one of the things that we've been trying to work on operationalizing. So how do we do this? So one of the approaches here, there are lots of different approaches, but one of the ways that we've been approaching this is in terms of breaking down the space of development into the different factors involved in that development. So there are different things at play, right? There's like the model you're using, there's like what you're thinking about that you want the model to do, there's the data, there's all this stuff, right? And so we've been working on frameworks to coherently go through all of these different kinds of considerations in order to make clear what things are already being packed into system development, with the hope that once you can, reflect on all of these deep, nuanced details, you're able to develop in a more informed way, working towards foreseeable benefits and not being hampered by foreseeable harms and risks. And so getting into this requires things like articulating what harms and risks are, right? It's very difficult for tech to do this. Tech as a whole generally is very good at benefits, extolling the benefits and solutions of tech. And so one of our sort of unique contributions in this space was to do things like honing in on different foreseeable harms, foreseeable risks, and tying it to the long-term effects of different models. So recently there has been particular concerns around language models. OpenAI released a couple language models that were massively powerful, generating large spans of fluent natural language. Gary talked about this in the opening. And we consulted with them. They ended up doing this model card framework thing that we had been developing. But where we got stuck was, well, we know there are issues, but what are those issues, right? We want to talk about potentials for misuse, but what is the source where we find those things? So one of the endeavors that we had been working on was articulating specifically harms and risks. So this is sort of neatly fitting within the overall paradigm of ethical processes, or how you operationalize ethics and development, focusing in specifically on the subtopic of harms and risks, thinking about the general purpose models, language models, and detailing the harms and risks therein. And then this ended up just very recently getting Timnit fired. I am also an author on the paper. Timnit and Emily Bender are co-first authors. But you wouldn't think it would be that radical to put foresight into a development process, but I think we're seeing now just how very serious that is, and just how little value companies are placing on the expertise and backgrounds of their workers. So one of the key things that I've been working on, that Timnit has been working on, that we're really trying to push forward in the ethical AI space, is the role of foresight and how that can be incorporated into all aspects of development.
Thank you very much.